from wherever you happen to be. It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. And now, here's your host, curator of the Hall, Jamie Dew.
Hey there. It is great to be back as the music fades into nothingness. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I'm back with you, and it's a great feeling to be here on episode 3 of the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. As my cohort Doug Donant said, by the way, when you're listening to that, do you picture me just getting up to no good in Toronto, still shots interspliced with video shots of, perhaps I'm squirting mustard on a hot dog at a hot dog vendor cart, or maybe I'm skateboarding awkwardly. Who knows what I get up to during those opening credits. You'll just have to use your imagination and go from there. This is a great episode coming up for you. I'm visiting with Jon Schneider, who is the head honcho over at the SNL Network. If you're not subscribed to that podcast, march on over and do that. Become a patron as well if you're so inclined. Lots of great SNL coverage there, and lots of great SNL coverage elsewhere. We're going to talk to some players in the SNL podcast game as we move forward in this endeavor. Added to the ballot this episode will be Steve Martin in the host category. So that's pretty exciting. Jon has a great way of breaking it down as well. And, why don't we just get right into it? This is my interview with Jon Schneider, where we talk about Steve Martin entering the SNL Hall of Fame.
Jamie. So, if we're going to talk about any Hall of Fame, whether it's, Canton for the NFL or Cooperstown for the MLB, you start to think like, can I tell the story of Major League Baseball without this person, or the story of the National Football League without this person? Well, when you're talking about, the Hall of Fame for Saturday Night Live, you cannot tell the story of Saturday Night Live without Steve Martin. This is a guy who hosted 15 times. He had the record for hosting for the majority of the run of the show. He was very involved with the original cast and really helped, make Saturday Night Live huge in its first 5 years. And throughout the entire history of the show, you have hosting gigs and cameos, and just Steve Martin is in the consciousness of Saturday Night Live throughout its entire history. So we really can't tell the story of SNL without him.
Yeah, great point. And I mean, he had such a phenomenal run off the top as well. I mean, he was, before 5-timers were even a thing, he was a 5-timer 2.5 years into his run. I mean, this was a guy that was hosting 2, sometimes 3 times a year in those 70s years. So really pretty spectacular.
Absolutely. I mean, it was, for the first 5 years, there were people who hosted a couple times a season. You don't see that so much now in present years, but basically, the first season, it was experimental. There was, nothing like Saturday Night Live in the way that it was just, so big in pop culture, and these cast members, the original Not Ready for Primetime players, they blew up. And at the beginning of season 2, a lot of people think, Steve Martin was in season 1, but he wasn't. He was brought in right at the beginning of season 2, this big name, October 23rd, 1976. He comes in and he instantly falls in love with this original cast and ends up hosting twice in season 2, 3 times in season 3, and then twice in season 5. He has 8 hosting appearances in the first 5 years. It was really crazy.
And he missed season 1.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, he's has 8 hosting appearances in 4 years, which is something that's unheard of. You do have those long runs where you have John Goodman and Alec Baldwin in the 90s and stuff like that. Timberlake in the mid 2000s, but there's really nothing like. There's really nothing like Steve Martin and his connection with this cast. It was almost like he was a cast member for the first 5 years.
It really was. In particular, I always got the sense that he and Bill Murray really, really clicked. Now, of course, there was the great stuff with Dan Aykroyd as well, and with all the cast members. But there was just, a couple opening monologues I remember specifically with Bill Murray. What is your familiarity with some of the monologues and some of the more memorable sketches in the 70s?
Well, I think, when at the time when Lorne was bringing in different hosts to come in, similar to now, they'll meet with the cast on a Monday and they'll write the show, in their voice almost. A Steve Martin episode is a Steve Martin episode. And, Steve Martin is not only an actor, he's also a musician. And you see him, every episode he's in the 70s, he's coming in with his banjo, he's playing some music. And, that's something that's fairly unique compared to, other episodes, unless obviously a Paul Simon is hosting or something like that. But, Steve Martin, you're going to get some music. And then you also get, this guy who, we talk about, recurring characters in the 30s and the 20s of SNL, but really in the 70s, there was a bunch of recurring sketches like the Coneheads, the Festrunk brothers, George and Yartuk, the wild and crazy guys, right. Theodoric of York. You talked about Bill Murray. There was the Nerds. And you can go back to some of those sketches and Steve Martin is in a bunch of those sketches. So it's almost like he was a cast member for some of the most memorable moments of the first 5 years.
Yeah, I remember really vividly the 15th anniversary. I wore that out on VHS. It was an NBC special, and there were so many in the montage, so many Steve Martin moments. That growing up, quite honestly, prior to seeing this 15-year anniversary, I often thought he was in the cast. I really did.
For sure. I think a lot of people did. I mean, I think that you can make an argument, and this was the, a lot of people now, they think of the main hosting rivalry because of, certain sketches that happened in the 2000s, which I'm sure we're going to get to. The main rivalry is Alec Baldwin versus, Steve Martin. But the original rivalry, in terms of hosting for SNL, and it's all friendly. It's nothing sinister, but the original rivalry was Buck Henry versus Steve Martin, who, Buck Henry hosts 10 times in the first 5 years. And you mentioned that 15th anniversary show, and really that's the last time Buck Henry appears on SNL, that you have this sketch between, Buck Henry and Steve Martin on the 15th anniversary show.
Yeah. Oh boy. The rivalry stuff is really great, and we'll get there for sure. But before we go, too much deeper into the hosting exhibits that he's put forth over the years, I have a question for you, and it is, what do you look for in, I guess we'll use the term Hall of Fame hosts? What are the qualifiers for you that make somebody that excels somebody to the next level of that hosting, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's, somebody who transcends the show. Like, I think if you saw that card come up on screen, between commercial breaks, and you saw that next week the show was going to be hosted by a Steve Martin, it's like people who don't watch SNL are going to tune in that week to watch Steve Martin because they know it's a special episode. And I think, there's just quality of work. We talk about baseball or NFL or any Hall of Fame. You look at like the longevity and the quality of work over time. He's been around for generations and different casts on the show, consistently putting in great work. That, like I said, you can't tell the story of SNL without Steve Martin, who was never working for SNL. He was brought in as a guest, and it's amazing to talk about.
What I think is really fascinating, and you might have updated numbers on this, but he's hosted 15 times and he's also guested 15 times. I don't know if your numbers bear that out,
Yeah, no, I believe you're right. I mean, he's a lot of his cameo appearances came later on in the run. I mean, he hasn't hosted since 2009. So,
Right.
most of, and I don't know if we're going to get another hosting appearance from him at his age, but you are right. I mean, 15, he has about, I think it's actually 16 cameos. So one came pre-recorded when Alec Baldwin tied his record in a monologue.
Oh,
Yeah.
so are there any other big key moments in the 70s that you cleave to, when you think of Steve Martin?
Yeah, so there's this
Performances in particular?
episode, Jamie, that you can't talk about Saturday Night Live without talking about April 22nd, 1978. This is one of the most famous shows in the history of the show. This is the Steve Martin Blues Brothers show,
Right.
and it is so famous for so many reasons. One being the Blues Brothers being, the musical guests, having John Belushi and Danny Aykroyd being their cast members, but they were also the musical guests. So that was so unique. Then you have this King Tut sketch, which is,
Right.
one of the most famous SNL sketches you can think of, that Steve brought onto the show. He wrote for the show. And then when you go back to the 40th anniversary, he breaks that out once again, 35 years later. So there's that. And then there's this sketch in there that, SNL fans, it gives you goosebumps whenever you think about it. But there's this, really famous Dancing in the Dark sketch with Gilda, where they get up from the table and they're dancing and everything else is silent behind them. And
Perfect.
it's so perfect and so unique. And most people think of that one and they obviously think of the Jan Hooks and Phil Hartman pre-tape that happened in the late 80s. But when you talk about the great Gilda Radner and her history with the show, you can't not talk about this sketch with Steve Martin, which he ends up hosting on the day she passes in 1989. And, instead of going out and doing a monologue, he says, I would like to just play you something, and goes back and plays this sketch from 1978.
So wonderful. It makes it more wonderful almost because he's so absurd normally, in his non-straight up performances. It's very absurd Steve Martin that you get. Now, of course, he was known for his absurdity, but to see him do something so tender and warm, and there's some funny moments in it as well. You don't, just watch it. That sketch is perfect, and she's the perfect person to do it with him.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And look, I mean, if you want a couple of other extra, nuggets from the from the late 70s, really, like, one of the cool things was there was this sketch that he also did with Gilda, where there was a restaurant sketch near the end of the November 4th, 1978 show, where they're in the middle of the sketch and suddenly NBC decides to go to commercial. And that is so unique. You never see it. Yeah, you really never see that often now, where a sketch gets cut halfway through, but they were running short on time and the sketch gets cut and it's halfway through. They just stop talking and it goes to the good nights after the commercial, and Steve basically says, like, I'm sorry we didn't have time to finish the sketch, but next time I host, we'll finish it. And they never did.
That's so great.
Yeah, for sure. And really, it's like I said, if the show had stopped after the first 5 years, we talked about Buck Henry, absolutely. Lily Tomlin, there's a few different hosts from the first 5 years that are really notable. Candice Bergen. But
Candice Bergen for sure. Yeah.
But you can't, you can't talk about the first 5 years without Steve Martin. And then it continues. And tell me what you want to get into, past those first 5 years.
Well, I think he shows up again December 6th, 86. And I feel like that's the episode that he's on with the Three Amigos. So it's not straight up him. He's sharing his time with Chevy Chase and Martin Short. But I think that the time he shows up with, I want to say, Sting. No, it's not Sting. What is the one that he shows up and his monologue is that he's not going to phone it in? Is that 89 or 91?
I believe that is 91.
Yeah,
With James Taylor.
I really thought that was a really great monologue.
7 minutes to wear, Mr. Moore.
Right. So you remember when Bill Murray came when you were the medieval barber and he came with his legs all broken from being dragged by the ox cart after having too much mead?
Yeah, what about it?
Oh, that was awesome.
That was a long time ago.
Steve, you want to run lines for our scene?
We have a sketch together? Is it on cue cards?
I guess so.
Well, what's the problem?
Mr. Martin, before I go, I was wondering, I found this in wardrobe, and I was wondering if you could sign it.
It's my old King Tut costume. I remember this. This is back when the show meant something. Back when I used to care.
Mr. Martin?
Steve?
Something's out there. Something's in the air. Don't know how, don't know why. Got a feeling tonight's the night. I'm actually gonna try. Not gonna phone it in tonight. Not gonna go through the motions tonight. This time I'm really gonna do the best I can. Mr. Cue Card Man, put those down over there. For some reason tonight I care.
You care?
That's right. That's why I'm not gonna phone it in tonight. Not gonna read my screenplay during the songs tonight. I can walk through my parts and still be hilarious. I've done it so often before. But look at these faces, look at this fat guy. He wants more, he wants more. Hey, I'm not that fat. Please. So many times I faked it just because I could. I'm that good.
That good.
But 20% won't do tonight.
Mr. Martin, I'll do it for you tonight.
Gonna do something different tonight. Something says not to just do Pat tonight.
I don't have any lines. I'm not in the show. But something tells me that if I were, I'd be raring to go.
Not gonna get liquored up tonight. Not gonna have a drink tonight. I'm not gonna drink till update is through. That's a promise to you, the viewer. Yes, after the show, I'll drink till I spew. But for now, I'm clear-headed for you.
I hide behind these wigs and this makeup, but tonight I'm gonna let myself shine through. Yes, they're gonna see the real Phil Hartman tonight.
I wouldn't do that, Phil.
Okay.
Follow me, everyone. Let's go make an effort. Not gonna have dead air tonight. Gonna sing as if we care tonight.
But Steve, why do you care? Aren't you rich?
I'm worth 17 million. I could buy and sell you and you and you 1,000 times over. But tonight there's a show to do.
5 minutes till a monologue, Mr. Martin.
Thanks, Joe.
I can't ever get fired. I've got a union job. But somehow tonight, it doesn't matter that I'm in with the mob.
Move our big lord asses tonight. We're gonna move our fat teacher asses tonight.
This way.
Steve, what's going on?
Oh, we're gonna do our best tonight, Lorne.
What? The show's on automatic pilot. I don't even come in until Saturday.
Lauren, don't you see? That's not the way it was in the 70s. Back in the 70s, people cared. They believed in something. Now it's the 80s and everything's yuppie, yuppie, yuppie. Spend, spend, spend.
Steve, it's the 90s.
Whatever. The point is, I've always wanted to see how good I could be. I just want to know.
Then go, Steve, go and do a great show.
Thank you, and I've never felt so alive. God, I feel young again. I feel 38. Come on, everybody. We're gonna learn our lives, do our parts well, then we'll go back to coasting, but not while Steve's pose. 'Cause we're not gonna phone it in tonight. Not gonna sleepwalk through tonight. I made it happen. Steve made it happen. Now it's inside. Now it's inside. Live from New York. Line. It's Saturday night.
It is a classic monologue. But before we even get into that, Jamie, I mean, I'll give you like another interesting note because you can't, like I said, you can't talk about Steve Martin without talking about the Lorne years because he really didn't appear during the Dumanian and Ebersol stuff. But there is a weird note that there is a canceled episode of SNL from the writer's strike. May 2nd, 1981, which is when Ebersol takes over from Dumanian, wants to bring the show back to what it was supposed to be because, the beginning of season 6 is not great. And, he wants to bring in some of the all-time hosts. There was going to be a Buck Henry episode, our 11th, hosted episode that never happened. And there was going to be Steve Martin's 9th episode, May 2nd, 1981. Unfortunately, we have a writer's strike. And as you know, the show has a history of, great episodes that were canceled because of writer strikes.
Oh boy, no, I didn't know that. That's really a great one.
Yeah,
that's a great pull.
Yeah, and we see him briefly in 1982 cameoing in a Good Nights with Eddie Murphy, and but that's it. And then like you said, December 6, 1986, season 12, which is the start of the next great cast. You think that's of right. your Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman cast. That's the next golden cast that we have probably for a few years, and then probably for another 20 years. And just him reappearing on the show really made you feel like SNL was back.
It did. It truly did. And I can remember that's around the time I started watching was 86. And I watched a little bit in 85, but 86 was when I caught on. And although several of the hosts I didn't know because they just weren't part of my zeitgeist, Steve Martin was always one that I looked forward to and that I saw that I would definitely make sure to see when I was checking out SNL until it became absolutely regular in around 87. So he shows up again in 87 and then 89 with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. But going back to that December 14th, 91 with James Taylor episode and the Not Gonna Phone It In Tonight. It's so fun because at this point he went from being this host that just had this track record of showing up and killing and destroying on the show and showing up, 8 times in 4 years to then, 3 appearances and then really making fun of himself in this 4th appearance of the new Lorne era. That he at this point is way bigger than the show, even though he's, appearing on the show, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't talk about, his late 80s and early 90s appearances without talking about a different episode Jamie, which isn't hosted by Steve Martin, but it's actually hosted by Tom Hanks. And, in 1990, Tom Hanks hosts an episode where he gets his, 5 Timers Club,
That's right.
his card, which gives him entrance to the 5 Timers Club. And, that is, really the first cameo of Steve Martin, when he's, or one of the first few cameos of Steve Martin when he's not actually hosting the show. But, Tom Hanks walks in and sees Steve Martin and Elliot Gould and Paul Simon and different people in the lounge. And, I think that's the moment where SNL becomes, so much bigger. Because it's like, oh, there's a lot of meta nature here where the show can talk about how, its successes are so big that if somebody hosts 5 times, they get rewarded for it.
You're completely right. It lended credence to that premise, like right off the bat, to see Steve Martin in there. And really a new sort of era, a meta era. Interesting. Yeah. I hadn't considered it that way, for sure.
Yeah, and then we mentioned like the Steve Martin Buck Henry rivalry at the beginning, but then the 90s as Steve Martin is such a huge star and maybe isn't around the show as much as he was at the beginning because of his love of that original cast, and then you start having other guys creeping a little bit closer to his record. You have the John Goodmans and the Alec Baldwins, and I would say that when you think about Steve Martin's, last, 25 years with SNL, it's really defined by his relationship with Alec Baldwin, who ends up overtaking his record as, the show continues.
Are there any moments in that rivalry that stand out to you that you want to speak to?
I mean, for me, there is a big break in his hosting appearances where he ends up coming back in 2006.
Yes.
And it is there's a cold open there where it's so great. And, this is my favorite era of the show, personally. Okay. But if I'm trying to be objective about, Steve Martin, I watched this cold open and he's out for dinner with Kelly Ripa. And they're on a date and he takes some sort of, like Viagra. And the joke is that Kelly says on the date, hey, do you know that Alec Baldwin is about to steal your hosting record? That night. And he gets up, leaves her alone, and runs to 8H and ends up like throwing Alec Baldwin off of 30 Rock.
Yes. He rolled up in a mat or a rug.
Exactly. And it's so funny, and it just starts this competition that the two of them end up having where Alec Baldwin ends up winning out, probably due to age, he ends up hosting more times and then obviously has, a lot of connections with the show just beyond, like his political impressions, all that stuff like that. But, you start to see it. And then there's a Platinum Lounge sketch in late 2006 where, Alec, goes in because he's hosted X number of times and they go in and they're trying to kill each other by pouring poison in each other's glasses.
Yes. He's got the poison in his ring at first, and then they switch the glasses. That's so tremendous.
And it's so great. And that's the kind of stuff that you love to see because, when you're, the number one thing, when you think about sports, and a lot of times you're talking about Hall of Fame, you think about sports, you think about like your insiders, like your Ken Rosenthal's or your Adam Schefters from different sports and what kind of news they're going to break. And, they'll often say like so-and-so is signing with a team or so-and-so is retiring, whatever it is, news about sports. But when you get news about Saturday Night Live, it's always like, who's going to host? Who's going to be the musical guest? And how is that going to affect the rankings. And I come to you from, my podcast, SNL Stats, which is a little bit more analytics and statistics. And for me, it's always fascinating. If I found out later in this year that Steve Martin is going to host the show again, that is so monumental in terms of his impact on the overall rankings. So those things are so fascinating to look at when he comes back and hosts in 2006 and 2009, is competing with Baldwin. It's so great for the show.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a really amazing pick. And I have to say my personal favorite episode is that one on February 4th, 2006. Prince was the musical guest. And almost every sketch to me landed that episode. There's so many great memories. Is there, if you had to encapsulate things into one brief sentence as to why he belongs in the SNL Hall of Fame, what would you sum it up as?
Well, look, I would say that, the show's biggest celebration was the 40th anniversary of Saturday Night Live in 2015. And, after JT and Jimmy Fallon did the cold open, there's, it's time for, this crazy long list of people who they're going to introduce for the night as cast members. And then you get into the traditional monologue. And who is out there, in front of a bunch of different styles of hosts? You have like your Peyton Mannings and your different musical guests that have hosted, and different Miley Cyrus is up there. There's all these different types of comedians, but Steve Martin is front and center in front of the hosts on the 40th anniversary. Introducing, basically he's the host of all hosts, and there's just no way that you can have a Hall of Fame without having Steve Martin in it.
Whoa, it gets funky at the end there. Just a little bass right at the tail end of that hit. Wasn't that great? That was a great time spent with Mr. Schneider there of the John ilk as he led us through this real clear and concise, argument as to why Martin belongs in the Hall. So now it's up to you. When voting opens, whether or not John made a compelling enough argument for you to cast a ballot for Mr. Martin, we shall see. You only get 12 votes. And, when the full ballot is revealed, you're going to have a difficult time casting those 12 votes. And here's the thing, you don't even have to cast 12. You can cast up to 12. So you might be a real pernickety person who thinks this is the Hall of Fame. This is my definition of the Hall of Fame. It's only this echelon of people or this caliber of people that you're, focusing on. So we'll see. We'll see how this all plans out. If you want to know more information about the voting process, I would say your best bet is to either shoot me an email, jamie@snlhof.com, or visit snlhof.com, the website, and there's some information there for you. You can subscribe so that you'll get the voting list sent to you. You can just do it over social, etc. when the time comes. So there's that. That's what I've got for you, and I hope you enjoyed yourself this week in the Hall. For goodness sake, turn out the lights on your way out, because for now, the Hall is closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. You can find everything you need to know about the show at snlhof.com. Don't forget to subscribe, share, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcast. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next month in the Hall.
Podcasts and such.